The Cleveland Browns are on the clock. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you are new here, then please do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It is NFL Draft Week. We are finally here. We're just a few days away from the first round starting on Thursday night. I'm already preparing myself to, stay up until about probably 6 or 7 a.m., given that the draft doesn't start until 1 a.m. UK time over here. Thankfully, the Browns are picking at number 2, so I won't have to wait that long to see the pick. But unfortunately, I'm a bit of a weirdo, so I will be watching the entire first round, just in case the Browns make a move, and of course to see what players the Browns will have the first pick of in round 2 on Friday night. The Cleveland Browns are on the clock. Whilst they might be picking second overall, we all know the Titans are taking Cam Ward. The guy is out here calling Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears top 3 running backs in the NFL whilst playing Fortnite. So I think it's pretty obvious. The Browns are essentially on the clock. Now, similar to the Titans, you could argue that we already know who the Browns pick at number 2 will be, but you never know. In this video, I just wanted to kind of react to some of the draft news that we've had the past couple of days, as well as give my kind of final thoughts on the Browns draft, what I think their strategy should be, what positions, what players I think they'll be targeting. I will probably do one more video before Thursday, probably a mock of some kinds, just to plant my flag on as we enter the first round. But for now, as I said, just wanted to kind of talk about where I'm at just a few days out from the draft. So first and foremost, as I said, I think we all kind of know who the pick is going to be. Travis Hunter is the pick. At this point, I would be shocked if it was anyone else. I've said during this whole process that whilst Abdul Carter was my preference, you can't go wrong with either Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter. If it is Hunter, I am perfectly happy with that. I think that will be a great pick for the Browns. Same with Carter as well. But in the end of the day, you can't go wrong with either. It is looking like it will be more Hunter. But let's say the Browns do shock us, I think it would be for Abdul Carter. So I'm not exactly too worried about it because, as I said, I don't think the Browns can go wrong with either player. Travis Hunter would bring, much needed hype to this, to the locker room and the fan base as well. So Travis Hunter, most likely we're going to be welcoming him as the newest member of the Cleveland Browns come Thursday night. But you never know. You never know. That's the fun of the draft. Adam Schefter reported today, I believe, that the Browns had previously inquired about trading up for the first pick, but that the Titans weren't interested. Was that a trade up for Cam Ward? I think that's probably where most people's minds will go. They obviously felt that Cam Ward was worthy of the first overall pick and were going to go up for him. But I do think there's also an argument that maybe, they fell so in love with Hunter that they were worried about someone jumping them for him. Could be a stretch, but again, we've spoken about it in some of these videos on Hunter. I've not seen Andrew Berry talk about a player who's not on his team, let alone a draft prospect, as highly as he's talked about Travis Hunter. Yes, that could be, smokescreen, but at this point, I think they're just, they know that Cam Ward's going number 1, so they're not hiding the fact of how happy they are to take Hunter at number 2. But as I said, they obviously inquired about moving up to 1 during this process and were told no. Probably was to go and get Cam Ward, but as someone that, I think Travis Hunter is a better prospect than Cam Ward as a player, it would not have shocked me, or I don't think it would have been out of the realm of possibility that they were doing so in order just to guarantee that they got Hunter. But you never know. It's not going to happen now. If the Titans said no whenever this happened, they're not going to say yes now on draft night. The Titans will be taking Cam Ward number 1. As I said, that gives the Browns first pick of the board. Is it Hunter or Carter? Probably Hunter, but I'll be happy with either. Mike Florio also has tried to add some fuel to the NFL draft talk fire with a report about how teams would be willing to move up to 2 for Shedeur Sanders. I don't buy it, but as I've said all along, if the Giants want to give up pick 34 to swap picks, then you probably have to do it. The added value of that second round pick and the flexibility it would give you would be massive. You could address 2 positions back to back, i.e. quarterback, running back, or it also means that if you were planning to trade into the first round for, let's say, a Milroe, you would still then have a second round pick, to address the other positions of need. I think it's unlikely. The fact that he mentioned for Shedeur makes it even more likely. Would a team trade up for an Abdul Carter or a Travis Hunter? I think that would be more likely than Shedeur Sanders. But at this point, I think the Browns are so in love with Hunter that if a team was coming up for someone that is not Shedeur Sanders, they're not going to take it because they'd be scared about that team taking Hunter, even maybe New York in that scenario as well. So for me personally, if New York wanted to come up for Hunter and wanted to give 34, I would do it because, of course, I still think Abdul Carter would be just as good of a pick. But I don't think the Browns are going to do that. I think they are that in love with Travis Hunter that they're going to just stick at 2 and take him. Regarding Shedeur, I do think we will see some form of a fall. I still think he falls past New York at 3. I know everyone's tried to place him there after that. They try to put him on the Browns at 2. It looked like that wasn't happening. Let's try and put him at New York at 3. I personally don't think that is going to happen. I think with they've added Jameis Winston, they've added Russell Wilson, Dabo, and them fighting for their job this year. I think they're going to take the best player available at 3, and I think that will be Abdul Carter. They can't go wrong with that pick. They probably addressed QB at one point in the draft, but I don't think it's going to be at 3. So I do see Shedeur slightly falling, and the further that he does fall, I think the better for the Browns, because the less quarterbacks that go in the first round, the better. The more these quarterbacks fall, the better, because it gives the Browns more options at 33. I still probably think it's more likely that only 1 quarterback goes in the first round than 3. If that's the case, and you've got Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Milroe, Jackson Dart, and all of those guys still there at 33, then that's probably the best case scenario for the Browns in regards to addressing quarterback. But I think Shedeur does go in the first, but it's just where he falls. If he does fall into the 20s, let's say, and the Steelers pick him at 21, that makes it more and more likely that Jalen Milroe will then obviously fall to 33. So I just think the further that Shedeur falls, the better for the Browns. During that first round, obviously watching the picks come off the board, the longer we're sat there and Shedeur Sanders isn't coming off the board, I think the better. Does he get into a range in the first round where the Browns want to come up for him? Maybe. Again, I've spoken that I think that's probably more likely with Milroe. But, as I said, it just gives you more options at quarterback. So, him falling, whether that means to the Browns or whether that means him falling pushes other quarterbacks to the Browns, i.e. Jalen Milroe, I think that's going to be the best case scenario for the Browns. If Milroe is the pick at 33, he does fall to 33. Do the Browns potentially come up from 67? It's, that's a fairly big gap. That's 34 picks in between those picks. Do they want to come up? Maybe there's a running back. Maybe there's an offensive lineman. Maybe there's a safety that they want to come up for. It's a tough one. I think it's probably more likely that if they are to do any form of a trade up, it's probably into that back half of the first for a quarterback. But I would not be shocked that if Jalen Milroe is there at 33, they take him at 33 and then use some of those later picks as is ammunition to come up from 67, let's say, for a tackle or a running back. Or but I think it's probably more likely they sit there at 67 and let the ball come to them. And then overall, I think for me and for the Browns as well, I think the Browns have to target a combination of quarterback, running back, safety, tight end, offensive line with, the first kind of 3-4 picks after that second overall pick. That, of course, means they're going to have to give in somewhere. It might come down to a situation where, I've got to take a safety later in the draft because I took a running back at 67 instead. It will all depend on how the board falls. I do think it's probably more likely that they target offense over defense, just with how they've approached free agency, how they've approached this offseason. It does kind of set them up to, to address offense heavily in this draft. So I do think that is probably the more likely route. They're going to take Hunter at number 2, whether you want to say that's an offensive or a defensive player. That's up to you. And then I think the next 3 to 4 picks coming off the board are predominantly going to be offense over defense. It is important to remember that, since Andrew Berry has been GM, the Browns have operated under certain guardrails when it comes to drafting players. Whilst this isn't the case with every single pick, more often than not, the picks may do somewhat fall within these guardrails. I won't bore you with the full breakdown, but essentially the Browns tend to target younger prospects with higher athletic profiles, and in some cases they do value prospects from Power 5 schools over those who aren't. Most Browns draft guys will consider these guardrails when making their predictions for the Browns, so it is always something to consider. People can argue all day about whether this method of operating works and if it's worked for the Browns. I, for one, don't subscribe to the idea that AB can't draft at all, but I do understand where it comes from. As I said, whilst they'll play the board as it comes, I do think they'll look to target a combination of Hunter as well as I said, quarterback, running back, tight end, safety, offensive line with their first 5 picks. With quarterback, of course, the ideal scenario for me is for Jalen Milroe to still be available at 33. But I wouldn't be shocked if they traded back into the first to acquire a quarterback. But I do think Milroe and probably Jackson Dart are probably the most likely picks, pardon me, in my opinion. But it will be interesting if Sanders does start to fall and whether the Browns are willing to make a move to, pair him with his former teammate. Whilst I've advocated against taking Sanders at 2 all off season, I must admit it would be pretty cool to have both Hunter and Sanders in the same draft. Wouldn't be against it at all. And if they are to miss out on a quarterback early or just don't plan on taking one early, I think Will Howard or Kyle McCord would be the most likely guys, in my opinion, as later round guys, probably in that 94 to 104 range, given that they don't have a 5th round pick. As for the running backs, this is where the idea of a trade back with New York would have been so intriguing, because you could have gone quarterback and running back early in the 2nd round. Whilst this running back class is really good, in my opinion, if the Browns do take, let's say, a Milroe at 33, they do then missing out on one of the kind of 2nd tier guys in a Caleb Johnson, Trevion Henderson, etc. They could take a running back pretty early, of course, if they don't go quarterback at 33, or they could take multiple swings in the mid to late rounds. For me, I think it's more likely than not that they don't take a running back until at least pick 67. So I'm just hoping that one of Caleb Johnson, Trevion Henderson or Quinshon Judkins is there. Otherwise, I'd probably look to target a combination of, an RJ Harvey at a UCF, a Bashal Tutin at a Virginia Tech, or a BJ Diddons at a Kansas State, among some other guys in the mid to late rounds, if that's the route that they plan on going. Tight end is an interesting one and probably depends on how the board falls. I think if they are to go tight end within their first 5 picks, which they probably should, then the 4 most likely guys for me would be Mason Taylor out of LSU, Elijah Ario out of Miami, Harold Fannin, of course, out of Bowling Green, and Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon. The Browns have met with all 4 guys and brought them in for top 30 visits. They all match their guardrails best, and they slot into that kind of 50 to 100 range that I think they'll be looking to target tight end in. Maybe they just want to add bodies to that room instead and just bring in another vet during training camp, in which case, they'll of course look to target guys more later on. But I think they should and will look to target tight end within their first 5 picks. Safety is another interesting one. I've spoke about this quite a lot during the offseason. We all agree that they should look to target offense early in this draft, but I do think safety is a position that the Browns need to get right. I've said so many times on this channel, that I'm sick of bringing in free agent safeties for them to not work out, and that the Browns should just look to draft a long-term partner next to Grant Delpit. Now, it might be difficult to squeeze the pick in within the top 100, but if some guys are available within those first 4 to 5 picks, then I think the Browns probably have to pull the trigger. Malachi Stark's draft stock has fallen massively for some reason, with most mocks having him going in the mid-20s now. I would be shocked if he does, but if he somehow falls out of the first round, then I think you probably have to take him at 33 if you aren't taking Milroe. That's a potential top 10 to 12 player in the draft at one of your biggest positions of need. I just don't see how you could pass that up. I personally think it's more likely that Nick Emanwari out of South Carolina falls to 33, which, I know most people might disagree with that after his, of course, incredible combine. But I do think it's more likely that he would fall than Starks, which, would also give you a big decision to make at 33. But I think it's more likely that, if they do go safety in the top 100, then it's probably later than that. And it's probably one of, Xavier Watts, Notre Dame, Kevin Winston out of Penn State, an Andrew Makuba out of Texas, or a Billy Bowman out of Oklahoma. As I said, in that more 67 to 104 range. Finally, the offensive tackle class this year, it's pretty thin. If they miss on a few guys early, then that could completely change their plan for offensive line in the draft. If Josh Connolly or Josh Simmons are there at 33, you obviously, of course, have to consider it. We did have a report from Tony Rizzo today that apparently the Browns are targeting offensive tackle at 33. It would be one of those 2 guys for me if they were to fall. And I wouldn't be shocked as well if they took a, Ursary out of Minnesota or Donovan Jackson from Ohio State at 33. That wouldn't shock me, but I think it's probably more likely that if they are to go offensive line within the first 4 to 5 picks, then it would probably be more guys like Ozzie Trapilo out of Boston College or an Emory Jones out of LSU, more in that 67 to 104 range. If they go Hunter over Carter, which I expect they will, then I still don't think they target edge in the top 100 unless someone falls, like a Donovan Ezericu at 33, or a James Pierce later on if he really starts to slide. They did also meet with Nick Skelton, so if he's there at 33, which I expect he will be, maybe that's another option as well. But it does just kind of feel with how they've filled out that room in free agency, depth at the position isn't a priority as it is compared to other positions. But you can never have enough good defensive linemen. So if someone they really like is there, it won't stop them from taking them. If there's any wildcard pick in play early, then I think it's probably linebacker. They traditionally haven't invested much capital in the position, but We still have no idea whether or not JOK will ever play football again, let alone next season. And whilst I think the room is fine enough, they could look to add a guy to that room earlier than some might expect. I'll be honest, I have probably done less work on this year's cornerback class than I've done on any position in the last few years. So when Andrew Berry inevitably drafts one, I'll probably have less to say about that player than any other pick. It does kind of just feel like one of the lowest, one of the lowest positions of need right now. And, with Hunter being the most likely pick at 2, it just eliminates that need even more, because whilst I expect him to take more snaps on offense, the Browns would be silly, not to use him at least somewhat on defense. But that's essentially my overall thoughts a few days out from the draft. It can't come soon enough at this point. Months of speculation, arguments on Twitter within the fan base, that all comes to an end on Thursday. I expect the Hunter pick to cause a lot of excitement on Thursday night, especially for those, at the draft party, at the stadium, watching Journey. I then expect even more arguments on Twitter after the Browns trade up into the first for Jalen Milroe, and the excitement quickly turns to despair for some fans. I'm, of course, kidding. I can't wait. The Browns haven't picked this high since 2018. Shit. It's going to be our first round pick since 2021. The Browns have 10 picks overall, 4 picks in the top 100. They have most draft capital in the draft according to most of the analytical models that, measure this stuff. So whilst they absolutely have to nail this draft, it's certainly going to provide a lot of excitement and intrigue across all 3 days. And I'll be right here breaking down every pick with you guys. But that would do it for me today. If you do enjoy my content, then please drop this video a like, hit the subscribe button. It's free, but it really, really helps out my channel. You can also check the links in the description to see where you can follow and interact with me on social media. I'm sure I'll be tweeting and posting a lot of stuff during the draft, so if you want to interact with me, that's the best way to do it. So go check out where you can follow me and connect with me in the description. As I always say, I'm trying to build a community of Cleveland Browns fans, and even if I only get to talk to one fan a day, I'm happy, because I'm talking Browns football with the best fan base in the world. Thanks again for watching, guys, putting up with my terrible croaky throat at the moment that I'm currently a little bit ill and going through. But I'm so excited for the draft. Wanted to hop on and talk about it. I hope you guys are excited too. Enjoy this week, of course. Enjoy the draft, but most importantly, go Browns.